Chennai 365, an effort by SKS in association with social, sports and cultural bodies to do good to a vibrant Chennai.
हरिः ओम्। गणानां त्वा गणपतिं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमम् ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पत आनशृण्वन्नोतिभिस्सीदसादनम् प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेर्वाजिनीवती धीनाम वित्रयवतु गणेशाय नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम्। निकृष्वैरसमायुतैः कालैः हरित्वमापन्नैः इन्द्रायादि सहस्रयुग अग्निर्विभ्राष्टिवसनः वायुश्वेतसि कर्तृकः संवत्सरो विशोवर्णैः नित्यास्तेऽनुचरास्तव सुब्रह्मण्यो गुं सुब्रह्मण्यो गुं सुब्रह्मण्यो शञ्च मे मयश्च मे प्रियञ्च मे नुकामश्च मे कामश्च मे सौमनसश्च मे भद्रञ्च मे श्रेयश्च मे वस्यश्च मे यशश्च मे भगश्च मे द्रविणञ्च मे यन्ता च मे दर्ता च मे क्षेमश्च मे दिदिश्च मे विश्वञ्च मे महश्च मे संविश्च मे ज्ञात्रञ्च मे सूश्च मे प्रसूश्च मे सीरञ्च मे लयश्च मरुतञ्च मे नृतञ्च मे यक्ष्मञ्च मे नामयश्च मे जीवातुश्च मे दीर्घायुत्वञ्च मे नश्रञ्च मे भयञ्च मे सुगञ्च मे शयनञ्च मे सुषा च मे सुधिरञ्च मे ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ नमो भगवते रुद्राय नमस्ते रुद्रमन्यवभूतो तैषवे नमः नमस्ते अस्तु धन्वने बाहुभ्यामुदते नमः या तैषु शिवतमा शिवं बभूव ते तनुः शिवा च रव्याया तपतया नो रुद्रमृडय या ते रुद्र शिवा तनुरघोरा पापकाशिनी तया नस्तनुवा शन्तमया गिरिशन्तापि चाकशीः या विशं गिरिशन्तहस्तेऽपि वर्षस्तवे शिवां गिरित्रतां कुरु माहि पुंसेः पुरुषं जगत् शिवेन वचसा गिरिशाक्षावदामसि यथा न सर्वमिज्जगत यक्ष्मगुं सुमनासत् अद्य वोचदधिवक्ता प्रथमो दैव्योऽभिषक् अलीगुश्च सर्वान् जम्बयन् सर्वाश्च यातु धान्यः असौर्यस्ताम्रो अरुण उत बभ्रुः मङ्गलः ये चेमागुं रुद्रा अभितो दिक्षुश्रिता सहस्रशो वैशाखमुखेडयीमहे असव्यो वसर्पति नीलग्रीवो विलोहितः उदैनं गोपादृशन्नदृशन्नुतहार्यः उदैनं विश्वा भूतानि सदृष्टो मृडयादिनः नमोऽस्तु नीलग्रीवाय सहस्राक्षाय मीरुषे अतो ये अस्य सत्त्वानोऽहं तेभ्यो करन्नमः प्रमुञ्च धन्वनत्वमुपयोराग्नियोज्याम् याश्च देहस्तैष वप्पराधा भगवो वप अवदत्य धनुस्त्वगुं सहस्राक्षते वीर्यशल्यानामुखा शिवो नः सुमना भव विज्जन्तनुः कबद्धिनो विशल्योपानवागुमुत अनेशन्नस्येष आभुरस्य निषङ्गतिः या ते हेतिर्मेरुष्टमास्ते बभूव देदनुः तयास्मान् विश्वतस्त्वमयक्ष्मया परिभुज नमस्ते अस्वायुधाय नादताय कृष्णवे उभाभ्यामुदते नमो बाहुभ्यां तव धन्वने परिते धन्वनो हेतिरस्मान् विणक्व विश्वतः अतो यजस्तवारे अस्मन्निदेहितम् नमस्ते अस्तु भगवन् विश्वेश्वराय महादेवाय त्र्यम्बकाय त्रिपुरान्तकाय त्रिकालाग्निकालाय कालाग्निरुद्राय नीलकण्ठाय मृत्युञ्जयाय सर्वेश्वराय सदाशिवाय श्रीमन्महादेवाय नमः। ॐ हर 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 ॐ नमः सोमाय च रुद्राय च नमस्ताम्राय च अरुणाय च नमः शङ्गाय च पशुपतये च नमो उग्राय च भीमाय च नमो अग्रे वदाय च दूरे वदाय च नमो मन्त्रे च हणीयसे च नमो वृक्षेभ्यो हरिकेशेभ्यो नमस्काराय नमः शम्भवे च मयोभवे च नमः शङ्कराय च मयस्कराय च नमः शिवाय च शिवतराय च नमः तीर्थ्याय च कूल्याय च नमः पार्याय च भार्याय च नमः प्रतरणाय च उत्तरणाय च नमः आचार्याय च लाभ्याय च नमः षष्ट्याय च पेन्याय च नमः सिकत्याय च प्रवाक्याय च त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात् यो रुद्रोऽग्नव्योऽप्सु योषधीषु यो रुद्रो विश्वा भुवना विवेक तस्मै रुद्राय नमोऽस्तु तमश्रूयश्चु सुधन्वायो विश्वस्य क्षयति वेदजस्य यक्ष्वामहे सौ मनसाय रुद्रं नमोऽभिर्देवमसुरं ध्रुवस्य अयं मे हस्तो भगवान् अयं मे भगवत्तरः अयं मे विश्वभेषजोऽयं शिवाभिमर्शनः एते सहस्रमयुतं पाशामृत्यो मत्यायन्तवे तान् यज्ञस्य मायया सर्वान् वयजामहे मृत्यवे स्वाहा मृत्यवे स्वाहा। ॐ नमो भगवते रुद्राय विष्णवे मृत्युर्मे पाहि प्राणानां ग्रन्थिरजुरुद्रो मा विशान्तकः तेनान्येनाभ्यायस्व नमो रुद्राय विष्णवे मृत्युर्मे पाहि। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। एका च मे तिष्ठश्च मे पञ्च च मे सप्त च मे नव च मे एकादश च मे त्रयोदश च मे पञ्चदश च मे सप्तदश च मे नवदश च मे एकविंशतिश्च मे त्रयोविंशतिश्च मे पञ्चविंशतिश्च मे सप्तविंशतिश्च मे नवविंशतिश्च मे एकत्रिंशश्च मे त्रयस्त्रिंशश्च मे चतुष्षश्च मे अष्टौ च मे द्वादश च मे षोडश च मे विंशतिश्च मे चतुर्विंशतिश्च मे अष्टाविंशतिश्च मे द्वात्रिंशश्च मे षट्त्रिंशश्च मे चत्वारिंशश्च मे चतुश्चत्वारिंशश्च मे अष्टाचत्वारिंशश्च मे वाजश्च प्रसवश्चापिजश्च क्रतुश्च सुवश्च मूर्धा च व्यश्नियत्यान्त्यायनश्चान्त्यश्च भुवनश्च भुवनश्चाधिपतिश्च इडा देवहोर्मणुर्यज्ञने बृहस्पतिरुक्ता मदानि शिषत् विश्वे देवासूक्तवाच पृथिवीमा धर्मामायुंसे मधुमनिष्ये मधुजनिष्ये मधुवक्ष्यामि मधुवदिष्यामि मधुमति देवेभ्यो वाचमुद्यासकं सुष्ठुषेण्या मनुष्येभ्यस्तं मा देवा वन्तु शोभायै पितरोन्मदन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। जातवेदसे सुनवाम सोमराति यतो निदहाति वेदः स नः परिषदति दुर्गाणि विश्वानावेव सिन्धुं सुरिताद्यग्निः तामग्निवर्णां तपसा ज्वलन्तीं वैरोचनीं कर्मफलेषु जुष्टाः दुर्गां देवीं चरणमहं प्रपद्ये सुतरसे नमः। अग्ने त्वं पारयानव्यो अस्मान् स्वस्तिभिरति दुर्गाणि विश्वा पूश्च पृथ्वी बहुलानुवृत्ति पवातोकाय तनयाय संयो विश्वानि नो दुर्गः जातवेद सिन्धुर्न नावा दुरिताभिवर्षि अग्ने अत्रिवन्मनसा गृणानो अस्माकं भोज्यविदातनूर्णा पृतनाजितगुं सहमानमुग्रमग्निगुं भुवेम परमाचदस्तात् स नः पश्यति दुर्गाणि विश्वाक्षामध्येवो अभिदुरिताद्यग्निः प्रत्नोजिकमेट्यो अध्वरेषु सना च होतानव्यचत्सि स्वाञ्चाग्ने तनुवं विप्रयस्वास्मभ्यं च सौभगमायजस्व गोभिजुष्टमयिजो निषिक्तं तवेन्द्र विष्णोरनुसञ्चरेम नागस्य पृष्ठमपि संवसानो वैष्णवीं लोकयमादयन्तां कात्यायनाय विद्महे कन्याकुमारी धीमहि तन्नो दुर्गे प्रचोदयात् साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः शर्व प्रचोदयात् साईरामाय विद्महे आत्मारामाय धीमहि तन्नो बाबा प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। स्वस्ति प्रजाभ्यः परिपालयन्तां न्यायेन मार्गेण नागेन महीमहीषा गोब्राह्मणेभ्यः शुभमस्तु नित्यम् समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Om Shri Sai Ram. Invoking the blessings of our most beloved Bhagwan. Sai Ram, good evening and welcome to the third study circle for chartered accountants and other finance professionals. For some of us who have come in today for the first time, the objective of the Sri Sathya Sai study circle is to discuss about the importance of ethics and values in the professional life. And given most of us are chartered accountants, the responsibility that we have towards the larger community is very immense, and it's appropriate that we as professionals are extremely clear about the values, the importance of values, and we also kind of put them in practice, not just in our professional life but also in our personal life. Before we commence today's session, we have a small honoring that we would like to do. So today we have Shri S.A. Murli Prasad with us, who will deliver the keynote address on professional ethics and values. And it's our privilege and honor to honor him and felicitate him on this occasion. Before I call upon Shri Murli Prasad on stage, I would like to say a few words about him. He is a very senior member of the Chartered Accountant fraternity. He is a Chartered Accountant and also a cost accountant. And he is, before that, he also did postgraduate in management accounting, statistical quality control and operations research. He has been in practice since 1977. In fact, that was the year I was born. But before that, he also was chief of finance in a joint venture with the Fortune 500 corporation in USA. So he's currently the founder director of SAM Consultancy Services, which provides consultancy in industry studies, project feasibility analysis, project financing, and many other areas. More apart from his professional work that he does for SAM Consultancy, I think Shri Murli Prasad has also been associated with various committees, mostly on the ethics and values side of things, both in the Indian regulator as well as the global regulators. He has been for several years a co-opted member of the Cost Accounting Standards Board and also Cost Audit and Assurance Standard Boards of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. He has also been nominated on several other committees, subcommittees and working groups set up by professional bodies of accounting and industry organizations. Now, I call upon Shri S.A. Murli Prasad to come over to the dais, and I request Shekhar sir to felicitate Shri Murli Prasad. Now I'll hand it over to Shri S.A. Murli Prasad to speak to us on professional ethics and values.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to be with you today on what could be a very self-introspecting kind of session. I approached today's session with great humility because this is a topic on which every one of us have something to say, but very few of us can really speak with authority. There are other subjects where perhaps we practice to the T what we talk about, but here there are always compromises in life. Peter Drucker years back wrote saying that compromises are of two types. Half a loaf of bread is still bread. Half a child is not a child. So some of us had chosen, I think, the half a child. Some have chosen the half a loaf of bread. And but we have all gone through this kind of conflicts between ethics and the kind of path that your official life takes you. And few of us, let's say, have come out without much of your loss of values. Others have perhaps not been able to manage that. We need to look at this problem with the perspective not only of accounting professionals, which are certainly kept in the forefront because it's a group of accounting, chartered accountants and finance professionals. But we need to also look at it in the larger canvas of what today's society holds out. I've held the opinion for some years now that no section of the society can be distinctly superior to the rest of the society when it comes to basic values. There is a certain level up, and you are part of an ecosystem, and you tend to be part of that system and behave in a way which other members of the fraternity behave. So there are enormous number of conflicts, but before we get into all that, let's look at a few basic ideas. Now, what is ethics? It's a derivation from a Greek word, which interestingly translates to custom, habit, or a characteristic way of acting. In other words, it is not the behavior. The ethics is not what the top 10% of society perform. The ethics is representing what is the expected behavior of a whole group. It is not the exceptional behavior of the top 10%. So if someone talks about ethics and thinks about what the top 10% of the society practices, I think it will be a misnomer. That's really not the way the word is derived. So when we talk about professional ethics, we are really talking about the ethics that permeates that profession, in which the majority of the people in the profession will practice those values. And as we go along, we'll do a little bit of introspection and see where it leads us to. Great philosophers of the past, like Socrates, Aristotle, all gave us an idea of what ethics is about. Ethics, they said, is a matter of character. It's a matter of nature because virtues are inherent in us. And Socrates said that knowing what is right is doing what is right. We wish that we can say that all the time. But that's what Socrates expected people to do. Knowing what is right is doing what is right. There are a few questions which crossed my mind as I started putting my notes on ethics. Has ethics anything to do with religion? Well, religion is a system of beliefs based on faith, revelations of truths revealed to man by God, like the Bhagavad Gita. Has ethics got to do something with that larger, canvas of religion, or it is merely a science of good practices? Down to earth, we just log what is good practice. You should not undercoat a fee with somebody. Well, that's good social behavior. So baseline, and we have kind of put them all together. It's a science of good practice. Second is ethics the same as morality? All the moral teachings which our saints of decades and current decades have done. Now, is that the same as ethics? Is that a practical sense of science of morality? I'll leave the questions with you. We'll probably come back and we'll discuss that also further as we go down. But I want to leave the questions with you. The next question is ethics founded on a bedrock of theism? Can an atheist uphold ethical values? I want to raise the question. Or is it that it's an integral part of, it's founded on the bedrock of theism, as I said? Where does ethics jibe with the law? Laws obviously regulate human behavior. But is what is legal necessarily ethical? The question needs to be answered at some point, because many of us console ourselves by saying that in particular situations, that what we are doing is legal. Well, it may or may not be ethical, but what we are doing is legal. Now we take solace, we take shelter under the four lines of law and say we are walking inside the line. Okay, therefore we should be all right. Is ethics the same as a code of conduct? We chartered accountants have a code of conduct. Is ethics the same as a code of conduct? I am tempted to think that codes of conduct, they put ethics into a form of rules, do's and don'ts. So that is not ethics, it's beyond that. It is the understanding of the human mind of what is right and what is wrong. So there is a subjective feeling behind ethics. When you say it's not ethical to do that, I think there's a judgmental part to it. It is not a case of clear-cut rules as it is in a code of conduct. Ethics can broadly be divided into two types. General principles of good behavior, which apply to human acts in all walks of life. Your personal life, your family life, your official life, your professional life, your social life as a neighbor, the society of which you are a part, and all of that. Then there is professional ethics, which probably is a set which applies to one group of people. Principles of general ethics, governing behavior adopted and applied to problems and issues confronting members of a given profession. That is how the literature on professional ethics has flowed. That out of the general principles of good behavior, the various accounting bodies and the various eminent scholars who are interested with the responsibility of developing a document on professional ethics. I also want to here record that the first book on professional ethics was written by a man called John L. Carey for the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and he was not an accountant, but it was written by him. Okay, so the growth of the literature on professional ethics with reference to the accounting profession has come about because people have kind of taken out those rules of general behavior, principles of general behavior, I must say, and kind of adapted them to the practice of an accounting profession. Now, this is the first of the big questions I have. Professional ethics and acts not related to professional work. All right, I am a chartered accountant and I strictly go by the code of conduct and the professional ethics so far as my practice of the profession is concerned. But with reference to my personal life or my social life, don't ask me, because that doesn't come under professional ethics. Okay. There are some interesting decisions, many of you may be aware. The 2018 decision, Supreme Court, in the Council of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India versus Shri Gurvinder Singh, where a chartered accountant, not in his capacity as a chartered accountant, but in a personal capacity, brought about a fraudulent sale of shares. The matter went to Supreme Court. It was argued on behalf of the accused that he was not in fact doing that act as part of the practice of chartered accountants. The Supreme Court stood firm and said that as the schedule to the Chartered Accountants Act stands, it should be interpreted. It overruled the High Court decision, and it said that it should be interpreted to mean that even if it is an act not within the four corners of his practice as a chartered accountant, the schedule will apply. And I just extend it to say that professional ethics also applies, because ethics is not a question, is not something where you draw boundaries within your life, within your practice area. The second one was a very old decision. I took one new decision, a very old decision of the Gujarat High Court. Many of us may, in the senior citizen category, may remember that there used to be a book which said how to make black money. Okay, it was published and written by a chartered accountant, Mr. P.C. Parekh, and had a very good circulation at the time when it was published. Partly people read it out of curiosity, and people also read it because they wanted to know how to make black money. Those were the times when tax rates were 99.75%, and India had the label of being the highest tax nation. Now, the question was, there's a very interesting side story to that. By the time Mr. Parekh was hauled up and a pronouncement was made in his case by the disciplinary committee of the institute, he had retired from the firm and he has ceased practice. So when it went to the Gujarat High Court, the argument was put up on his behalf that he might have written that book, but he did not induce anybody to make black money. He just wrote that book on what life is about. And he said that he has since retired and he has nothing to do with the practice of the profession. Gujarat High Court put its foot down again. It said that he deserves to be punished. It kind of upheld the decision of the disciplinary committee that 5 years of removal from the register of members will be the kind of punishment. Now, these are two things which take us to a sphere which we would like to examine, like chartered accountant in the practice of accounting he will follow the professional ethics. But what about his ethical standards as a citizen, as a member of the general public? Now, is he expected to uphold values which are similar to the values which he is exhorted to uphold in his professional life? I would think personally that he does. That you can't have two different standards, one for the personal life and one for the professional life. I think these ethical standards do coalesce, they kind of overlap with each other. Now we come to the question, what is a profession? Because we're talking about professional ethics. A definition which I'm afraid is often forgotten by professionals, often forgotten in this world of huge competition and all that. I don't want to venture my own definition, but I want to bring a definition which a very famous writer on management, Mary Parker Fowler, who lived between 1868 and 1933. Now, she wrote a definition of what is the profession. And she said, a profession, unlike business, is characterized by three things. It is characterized by specialized knowledge and skills. We all accept that. It is characterized by a service to society. That's how the noble professions evolved. The legal profession, for example, the medical profession, for example. Now, all of them evolving as a service to society, over and above as a means of livelihood. And the third one, that a profession is always regulated by a code of conduct. So Mary Parker Fowler said that these are the three things which distinguish a profession from a business. Now, how many times is this being remembered by professionals? The order of the day is different. There is this megamania. Accounting firms have to be very large. When professional firms become large, they become businesses. When businesses become large, they become bureaucracies like the government. That is inevitable. The sheer largeness of size change that definition of the profession, take it on to a stage where it partakes the nature of a business. I'm not saying that ethics can't be practiced in a business. Ethics are practiced in a business. But the point is, it is not that category of what you call the professional ethics. It becomes more and more difficult to kind of practice that. So you have today a situation where there are a large number of very large firms of accounting, and they have to be kind of conducted. There is nothing wrong in that. They have to be conducted on kind of business principles, with budgeting, with long-term planning, with let's say human resource management, with research and development, with all the rest of that. And then you have this question of the professional ethics, whether that could be practiced in the same way in those large firms. And if in the future this characteristic grows, you get large national firms, large local firms, regional firms. Now, how difficult will that be to maintain professional ethics of the type which we know today? Or do you need a new set of rules, a new set of ethics, which will apply to the larger ones, and that will apply to the small and medium practice? Questions which we need to answer as we go along. At this point, I wish to kind of lead you on to what the International Code of Ethics of Professional Accountants talks about. I have some reason why I start with the International Code, but before we go into that, there is a body called the International Ethics Standards Board of the IFAC. And that has brought out the International Code of Ethics, a new volume huge volume. You see some parts of that later. Effective June 2019. So this meeting is not one day too early or too late, because this is going to become effective June 2019. It's more than a consolidation of what has been said earlier, in parts it is. But it is also a kind of relook at what has been said earlier about professional ethics for accountants. And it applies to all accountants, irrespective whether they are in business or they are in practice. It uses two terms, PAIB, professional accountants in business, and PPA, PAPP, professional accountants in professional practice. So there are two categories, and many of the principles apply to both of them. And it deals with the ethical questions which are confronting the world today. We will take a look at that, and we'll also see that there are a lot more outside of that. Now you ask me, why International Code of Ethics? Why not to pick up the Institute of Chartered Accountants, book on professional ethics? Everything is going global, so let ethics also go global. It's one way of looking at it. Alternative is to deal with the ethical standards of ICAI. But then I find that the audience here comprises, besides chartered accountants, also other finance professionals. So they may not exactly be governed by the whatever the ICAI has to pronounce. And lastly, unfortunately, the Indian code has not been revised for some years now. And this world is changing. This world is changing too fast for us to continue with any old document. Now, the International Standards Board, Ethical Standards Board, has created a conceptual framework for professional ethics. And it has identified 5 fundamental principles. And there is a 6th one, which you see in a different color, which is independence. Tongue in cheek, the board says that independence is not a fundamental principle. Okay. The other 5 are fundamental principles. The 5 fundamental principles are professional competence with undue care, due professional care. We are very familiar with the concept. Competence is the core of that. I think today, in a number of instances, professionals are tested not so much for their ethics as for their competence. Because I've been on the boards of companies. I've been on the boards of companies for more than 35 years. And large South Indian companies, family-owned, professionally managed companies. And if you take your mind back over 35 years, you do identify a few instances where there was an ethical dilemma. You had to exercise your judgment. You had to kind of decide whether this was on the right side of ethics. What the company was proposing was on the right side of ethics. Throwing your mind back over 35 years, you can identify 5 or 6 of them. So your ethical orientation was tested in those 5 or 6, on the 5 or 6 occasions. But every board meeting, your competence is tested. Therefore, it is not surprising that when the Ethical Standards Board sat down and wrote the fundamental principles of ethics, it brought in this professional competence. Because I find that the two are complementary, rather two are supplementing each other. The competence gives the professional the courage, the kind of courage of conviction to be able to take a stand on an ethical matter. I think I'll be safe in saying that a professional weak in his own area of practice will find it very difficult to support high ethical standards. It is difficult to say no. because he doesn't have that kind of professional competence. Arguable, but that's one way of looking at it. And the Ethical Standards Board had taken this stand that professional competence coupled with due care, obviously, because you may have the competence, but if you are careless, it doesn't help. So with due care will constitute the first of the principles. Integrity goes without saying. Objectivity, obviously, is a very important characteristic of the professionals. And being objective itself calls for strong ethical values, because being objective is difficult. It is easy to take sides. Being objective is difficult and does call for strong ethical values. Then the confidentiality. Obviously, the accountant is dealing all the time with sensitive information, information which, if divulged to others, can cause irreparable harm to the client, and therefore confidentiality is important. Then comes the professional behavior. The behavior vis-a-vis the client, the behavior vis-a-vis his fellow professionals, the behavior vis-a-vis his own, let's say, colleagues in his firm. So a lot of that falls under professional behavior. These together, the Ethical Standards Board said, are the fundamental principles. And they said together with this, the professional is also expected to uphold independence, because many of these values are difficult to practice if the independence is a compromise. Now you may come back and say, what constitutes that independence? Now, is that the state of your bank balance that decides whether you're independent? Now, difficult to say yes, difficult to say no. We can argue, I can argue over time that independence is a state of mind. It is not a state of affairs. So if you are independent, you are independent. It doesn't matter what your bank balance is. But the fact remains, let's all face it as accountants, that in practice, it does make a difference. What is your position vis-a-vis the particular situation where this ethical question is coming up? I remember very early in my career, the first or the second year of my career, a team from my collaborator firm came to India, and that included a member from the internal audit team of that company, the Fortune 50 company that my biodata mentioned. So it included a representative of the internal audit department. And we in the company took them around and introduced various people. And one of the persons whom we introduced was the partner who was signing our company's accounts. So we took him to this group and said, this is so-and-so, partner of so-and-so firm, and it was a very large regional firm. So we said the partner of so-and-so firm, and added, thinking that we were adding to the stature of the partner, saying that this firm is also the auditor in ABC company, XYZ company, PQR company in our group. So we mentioned all the large companies in our group and said that this audit firm is the auditor for all these companies. And the internal audit man took one long look and asked, Mr. So-and-so, what percentage of your firm's earnings come from this group? Okay. Now, that question greatly impressed me at that age. Because if you are talking about independence, if you say independence is a state of mind, fine. But if 90% of your firm's earnings come from one group of companies, that independence can be fictional. Okay. What advice? Obviously, I mean, if you can afford it, I suppose you will make sure that you avoid that kind of dependence in earnings. It's left to you. How you distribute, your work between clients. But if you have this dominance, one group or one company constituting a very high percentage of your fees, independence will become difficult. So while independence is a kind of quality that you may argue is independent of the bank balance, it also is some way linked to your economic position. And later on we are going to look at this problem from the individual's point of view. And I have a few instances from my own experience where these issues have come up. Now, I've already explained what this means, that what are the 5 items. And the professional accountant is expected to comply with the fundamental principles and, where applicable, be independent. That is the sum and substance of what they say. Now we come to the threats to following the principles. It's a very interesting statement by the Ethical Standards Board. What can be the kind of threats to following these principles, which were stated earlier? And be independent. What are the threats? They classified it into 5 types. One is self-review. If you as an auditor take up a case where you kind of design the systems and you are also the auditor who is going to evaluate the internal controls, obviously there is a conflict. Okay. So you can't have a self-review. You can't be the player and the umpire, much as one would like to be. But you can't be the player and the umpire. So self-review is one of those conflict situations, threats to your own independence. Then they talked about self-interest, that you are having a conflict of interest. Of course, our own regulations have this idea about your holding shares, your family members holding shares in the companies for which you do the audit. Now, all those fall within that category, that you have a self-interest which is posing a threat to your following the principles. Advocacy. You are left to kind of argue the case of your client. And it happens to a point where you are his advocate and therefore you can't offer him fair advice. Because you start believing in what you advocate. For years I used to argue before wage boards. I used to represent the newspaper industry and in some parts of the time cement industry. I used to argue before the wage boards. This was a statutory wage board constituted on an all-India basis. And I used to appear and argue before them on why a certain increase in wage levels were not justified, having regard to the capacity to pay of the industry. And I used to do it passionately. I was quite young. I used to do it very passionately. And over a period of time, I started realizing that even though the facts of the industry was changing and there was a much greater prosperity in the industry, I was in fact conditioned my mind to say that the industry doesn't have the capacity to pay. In other words, you start believing the cause which you are advocating while the facts keep moving. The threats have this problem, that the threat is not a threat at a given point of time. But as you move on, facts and circumstances change and you don't change as quickly as that. Therefore it becomes a threat. Familiarity, the great idea of rotation of auditors. Interestingly, the Ethical Standards Board doesn't use the word rotation. In fact, it doesn't advocate rotation. It talks about long association. It talks about that as an issue. Long association as an issue. And it talks about remedies for ensuring that that does not pose a threat to your following the principles. So that familiarity is partly that. Your objectivity is affected and your independence is affected because you are too familiar. And then the intimidation. Now, somebody was commenting before we started this session. We see so many people whom we know, who have been our colleagues, whom we have perhaps admired. Now we find that they have been caught in unethical acts. So we start wondering, can it be true? There have been cases where I've gone back and checked with friends. Is it likely that that person could have done something like this? And many times my friends also express surprise. But the fact is that he or she has done. We'll see a few reasons a little later why that happens. But I think one of them is this intimidation threats. People in high offices do face these intimidation threats. And IFAC has very clearly said, the International Ethical Standards Board has very clearly said that in some jurisdictions, this threat of intimidation is a major factor in the principles not being followed. So one should look at it, like what are the kind of situations and what is it that you can do. And there are a few other minor points which the standards come up with. The code deals with the special case of inducements and gifts. At what point of time inducements and gifts start eroding into the ethical values which you practice. It also talks about a NOCLAR threat. NOCLAR is an abbreviation it uses for non-compliance with laws and regulations. Okay, what do you do as a professional if you know that the company for which you are working or the company whose accounts you are auditing is indulging in non-compliance with laws and regulations? What do you do? Is there a commonplace, everyday problem? Now what do you do? The IASB has some suggestions on that in that regard. Obviously, the first suggestion is not to give up that assignment. It's not the first suggestion; it's the last suggestion. And before that, it has a number of other suggestions, number of other ways in which you should progress this to a point where resolution may become possible. And finally, if resolution is not possible, then you need to be prepared to give up the assignment or give up the job, as the case may be. It also deals with association, long association, as I said earlier. So it talks about identifying the threats, evaluating the threats, how important they are, and addressing these threats. There's a lot of pages which are devoted to these ideas. And one of them you can see is that you must remain alert for new information that may come in. You might have known the company for a long time, but you must be open for new information that may come in and be able to put that information to use to find out whether you can continue to have the same confidence as you had in the past. On a lighter wing, these days nothing is worth it unless it is also backed by an app. So the IASB has obviously thought that all this serious business of code of ethics, now it's not going to cut ties with people, not with the modern generation, unless you also generate an app. So they have generated an app which will be on the website in June. And this is a web-based tool that's designed to deliver the revised, restructured code in a digital format. And a number of very interesting features are there. Interactive table of contents, bookmarking can be done. You can share, copy, print, you can pop up definitions. Every time you run into a new term, NOCLAR, you can get the definition, description of terms used, and use of color to distinguish between parts of the code. And you can have hyperlinks to whatever cross-reference is there within the code, and an advanced search function, without which we are all lost, because we don't ever thumb through any material and arrive at the page which contains the material. We always want to kind of search, use the search for getting at that. and all that will be available. This is so much for what the international body has done. A lot of it, I think, is very relevant to India. A lot of that is high-class work, high-class professional work. We will do well. I'm sure the Indian Institute will follow that, and will come up with probably a slightly modified version to suit the institutional framework in India. But fact is that there is a lot of good underlying truths in this, which all of us may find worthwhile to read and follow. And more importantly, when we are faced with a conflict, this is the kind of publication to which we can go with profit, because it does discuss the issues in great detail. It will be very tiring to read through that book from cover to cover. But thanks to the E-code, the way the book itself is organized, it may be good. It may make good sense that you kind of refer to it when you have problems. I want to deal with something that is less structured. I want to kind of share with you, thereby kind of get you to think on what is facing us today. Indian environment, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, our own set of clients, our own set of companies where we work. The kind of ethos that's developing in society, the impact of social media, the new generation, now their own preferences, the political, social, economic underpinnings. With all that, is our environment conducive to following ethics? The question I wish to raise. What is the present environment characterized by? The present environment is characterized by huge competitive pressures. We are in competition with everyone around us. We are in competition with ourselves. Okay. Now, this is a kind of environment. Now, that heightened competition, which has been fanned by, let's say, the management literature that came, the kind of TV and other media influence, what the great economists Modigliani, Duesenberry referred to as the demonstration effect, the way in less developed countries, the show of pomp, the show of plenty, which exists in other countries, the developed countries, whether that demonstration effect will alter the behavior of people in those regions. All that is happening. All that is happening with us. And maybe we are changing to an extent even greater than what the so-called advanced countries have changed. There's a huge amount of competition. And you see conspicuous consumption everywhere. You see the advertisement for the Harrier SUV. Okay, you turn the TV set for your cricket IPL match, and you see the Harrier being, kind of thrust. It may not affect me, it may not affect you. Now we may look at it and say, okay, good, that's a good car, looks like a good car. But what is the kind of impact it will have on a younger generation? I think is a question. It is conspicuous consumption everywhere. Then you are in the constant game of catching up with standard of living. It is not as if people did not want an improvement in standard of living in earlier years. Over all decades, over all generations, over, let's say, even our mythological times, there has been human grief. There has been genuine, shall we say, requirement of improving the standard of living. It has all been there. But suddenly you find that there is a game of catch-up all the time with standard of living. The result of that is that you are willing to mortgage the future for today's pleasures. And this is where I believe the greatest threat to professional ethics lies. I want to share a small anecdote with you. This was a executive in a large company, finance executive, needless to say, in a large company, confronted with an ethical problem. The company was wanting him to sign returns which he knew were not true. So he wanted an independent advice, which IASB also says that when you are in doubt, to please go and ask somebody who might have lived through similar experience. Please ask people like that to tell you what you should do. So he came and asked me. And it was a pretty tricky situation. The kind of infraction was not small amounts, huge amounts. And if something flares up, obviously this person would have been caught up very badly. So I was wondering, and it looked within few minutes of our conversation, that the only ethical course for him would be to throw out the job. So before venturing to tell him that he should kind of resign because there seems to be no other way out, I tried to bring in that idea a little carefully, a little cautiously. And at some point, he came back and told me something which still remains very fresh in my mind, even though this happened a few years back. He said, Mr. Muriprasad, I can leave this job, but considering my seniority, considering my pay package, I may not get the next job within the next 6 months. And I am not sure that I can carry on for another 6 months without my compromising my standard of living. Why you cannot compromise? Why you cannot compromise? Because, he said, I have recently bought a luxury flat and the monthly EMI amount is X. Okay, a very large amount. And he said that my wife is accustomed to 2 cars. I use a car, I take it to the office. Now she needs a car at home. She's used to that. So if I leave this job, I can't go back and tell her that one of those cars will be out. Okay, you'll have to learn to live with 1 car. My children are accustomed to eat in the best of the restaurants in the area. I don't want to go back and tell them that you can't eat in those posh restaurants from now on, that you'll have to kind of maybe carry your lunchbox from home. I can't tell them that. So the problem is not that I am not prepared to make a sacrifice, but I cannot plunge my family to these kind of problems, and therefore I don't see a way out. I just have to carry on here. I didn't know what to tell him. Now this is a dilemma which today many individuals and families are facing. That over time, the spending habits have gone to an extent. It's not only the spending habits. The spending habits alone is not the issue. There were always big spenders all the time. There were always frugal people. I mean, it's not a question of big spending being there. But today, we are all the time building the future wants into today through this institution called the EMI. Okay. Now, that in effect means that you can't make independent decisions because you have this Damocles sword. You don't want somebody to come and attach your refrigerator at home. You don't want somebody to come and take away your air conditioners. You want somebody to come and attach your flat. Now it's huge social, family, and individual setback. So what do? You live with the unethical situations. Situations in which people could have stood up and said, get lost, I am not informed. Now this is a big social problem. I am not the person to solve this problem. But I think it's a huge social problem. How are we going to get people to accept the fact that part of financial planning is not merely to maximize the return on your investment, develop a portfolio of investments which will get you the best returns. It is not a question of getting the most attractive terms on the EMI. It is not a matter of deciding when you will prepay a loan which you had taken on EMI. It is not all that, but it is deciding how much can you set aside for ensuring that you can hold your independence. What price ethics in this world, and can you kind of set aside out of your fortune an amount that will ensure that you can face the ethical trades. That is what we should be looking at. And obviously in all this, unhappy situation, obviously values come in handy. That's a savior. It could be built on our faith, our cultural, ethnic background, contributions of great saints. And even organizations need to build these values, but they are destroying values. You can see go around companies, go around large corporates, and they are destroying values. It's a sad state of affairs. An example, I go to a very large corporate hospital. I've been going there for the last 15 years. And for my own medical attention and also for my families. I like their consultants. They are all very competent people. They are all very good people. A lot of them are very good people. Moving with them, I always felt that they were very good people. Some of them have proved to be very close friends of me and my family members. So it's all very pleasant. Yes, you go and consult them. You come out and you know what the fees is for the consultant. And you tender it at the counter. It has to be paid in cash. Okay. It has to be paid in cash and no receipt. It's a large corporate house. And obviously, the consultants are paid well by the hospital. And the income by these consultations must be a huge amount. Now, why should an organization like that not take the stand that, look, in my organization, in our organization, payments are, strictly on the book. They cannot be outside the book. Now, I told you I have been with that hospital for 15 years. And a lot of people, very honorable people whom I know, have also been with that hospital. Some politicians obviously have been with that hospital. But the point is that we are seeing this happening around us. Organizations which must uphold values are destroying them. I could understand all this. To some extent, I think it's also a history of India that we see here. It is a history of a country which went through a 99.75% tax rate. Many years back, before all of you were born, probably. Beginning of my career. Palkewala, coming and speaking here in Chennai on the highest tax nation. Now, those were the times. And maybe this habit started at that time. And today the tax rates are very reasonable. And there is no reason why this kind of practices must continue. They continue because we haven't found a way by which organizations will stand up and say, sorry, we stand for values, this will not happen in my organization. Who has to set the tone? Not the middle level manager, obviously not. He will get crushed. If the middle level manager talks about ethical values, he will get crushed. Now it has to be the top. That is why I put that sentence, the tone at the top. Will large organizations own their responsibility to set up values to uphold ethical standards in our society. Will these large corporations do that? Because if they don't do that, if they don't begin to do that, I suppose the time will come, Bertrand Russell wrote many years back, that it will be the society that will start dropping its value systems, and then over a period of time the individuals will simply get extinguished. And I'm afraid something like that will happen. If the corporates, which are such an integral part of our society, which probably command resources, which are the largest in society, now if they don't set the standards, I don't know what will come of this society. Thank you very much. We will take any questions.
Just hang on, sir. Okay, thank you, Sri Murali Prasad sir, for very nicely articulating the definition of ethics and how the conceptual framework is coming about. You started off with certain pertinent questions, sir. I think these are questions which is there in everybody's mind and worth exploring in detail, each one of them in a session. Like whether ethics is morality, whether ethics is religion, whether ethics can be associated with theism, whether ethics means code of conduct or is ethics being legal. I think these are very, very pertinent questions, and I think we already have now topics for our next few months sessions. You also spoke about two types of ethics, professional ethics and general ethics, and also some parts about the threats which are there today, which is preventing us or perhaps which is challenging us in following some of these ethics. We are very thankful to you, sir, for taking time to speak to us. Now I call upon Sri Vijay Raghavan, sir, to present a memento to our speaker. The format of study circle, as pronounced as we have guidance from Bhagwan, is to take a topic and discuss in detail. I think you have set the tone, sir, for some of the questions that we have. And to continue the discussion, we have with us Sri Krishnan. Krishnan is a chartered accountant and also a certified information systems auditor. He is a psychologist and a leadership coach. He has over 25 years of experience in the corporate life, working with companies like Deloitte, RPG Group, The Hindu, and he is currently CEO of Ananta Group, a global organization that is engaged in leadership coaching, training, strategy consulting and publishing. More than his professional accomplishments, he has been associated with Bhagwan and the organization, as he puts it, designed in Parthi and built in Sundaram, Chennai. He's been associated with the organization for a long period of time. We thought it will be apt to also, to join you in discussion today and bring about certain messages which Bhagwan has laid out in these realm. So now I call upon Sri Krishnan onto the stage.
Okay.
some questions as we proceed in this conversation.
Sai Ram and good evening. It's such a privilege to be here in this study circle organized by Sri Satya Sai Seva organization. I go back 30 years. How Swami helped me get that mark to get the chartered accountancy. Normally people get marks out of 100, so I got marks out of grace. So I'm ever grateful to him, and this is such a pleasure being here. And I'm also blessed to often bump into such Bhishmacharyas. Here is one Bhishmacharya, and I'm always aware that it's such a blessing to have conversations with such people. In fact, incidentally, just yesterday, I happened to have a long informal conversation with another Bhishmacharya, one Mr. Sivaraman, was a former CEO of the L&T group, and again talking about ethics, and he's another person who stood for values and ethics. So it's such a pleasure, sir, to be here. And this is more of a conversation, and as a leadership coach, every coaching session, the coach asks a lot of questions, making the client think. And here is a speaker who's very, very unique because he asked us more questions. Normally you have a question session at the end of a talk. Here is a person who gave us more questions. And in fact, that is what probably Buddha or Ramana Maharishi or any other spiritual master have always done. They make us think, they ask us questions, they ask us to figure out things. So now, as part of this conversation, we are talking about societal values and professional ethics, society level ethics and professional ethics, and how they are connected, disconnected. The topic is decoupling professional values from societal values, and why does this matter is the first question. So I am one person who on one side moves with such Bhishmacharyas. The other side, I also move very closely with the young minds, the teens, who are like Sir said, very much influenced by the media, by cricketers, by actors, by every famous person around. So it is very critical that we talk about how any profession or in general any individual is influenced by the society overall. And in fact, I remember my mother used to tell me she was never allowed to watch a movie. And probably the first movie she watched after a lot of deliberation was a movie called Avayar. That was the only movie she was allowed to watch. And today, there are these ghost movies that are released, every month or two. Parents take their children along. And you have certain sports people behaving in certain manner on and off the field, which influences the whole generation. We are not talking just about cricket, we are talking about how the cricketer's behavior influences the whole generation to behave. Like it's cool, right? So they say it's cool to be adventurous. It's cool to jump the traffic. It's not cool to stop for the signal. So there is a huge impact. So now it's my turn to question him. So what's your take on this? And probably we can start with, what's that, what are some of the good things that we can learn from the earlier generation to which he belongs? I can hold her mic.
No, I think that's okay. The influence of what we see around us today is obvious. I mean, a lot of that may be not so positive. A few of them can be positive. But I think it's kind of hazardous to compare generations because situations were very different. We obviously can't compare one generation with the other. So we should really look at what we can do to kind of offset this effect of what people see, young people see on the media. I also find from my contacts with young people that a number of them are also not very happy with what they see. I mean, a lot of them question that. A lot of them kind of feel something like Dhoni running onto the field. Now, I see a lot of young people saying, what business has he got to run onto the field? Okay. You can see in the social media both kind of comments. Now, it's not one-sided, but I think the building of the values, I think this is what we are coming down to. One of the major things which is happening, particularly this generational change, is that you will all agree that our father, our mother had a lot more time to spend with us than the next generation. And the generation after that has even less time to spend with their children. So one of the great problems is this value building. The value can't be built outside. It can't be built in the school. It can't be built anywhere. It has to be built at home. Now that is a big challenge today. It's time management at the bottom. Now, how are people going to manage the time that they can find enough time to invest in young people and build their value systems? And if they do that, I'm sure that all the distractions that are around, they will still have a way to go through that. But that's becoming tough. That's becoming very tough. And it's easy to say that you must find the time to invest, but every one of us is finding that time is simply not on our side. But this is where I think it should begin. That people start planning that kind of time they are willing to invest in building values in young people. And then all these, cacophony around you, you can let that go on. But it may not have a profound effect on the young people. This is what I feel, the difference between the generations.
And another interesting thing that happens when you talk about society and a profession, and how is a profession different from a society? I want to give a simple analogy. In the corporate world, we often see a manager asks for a report. It could be an analysis, an Excel analysis, or it could be a report. So this employee comes back with a printout and he gives the manager, he leaves. And then the manager calls him back. So I'm going to send this report to the top management. So can you please sign and give it? And then he says, please give me 10 minutes, I'll go check and then come back. So the moment you ask somebody to sign and give the statement, he retreats, he takes 2-3 steps back, says, let me check. So there is that additional responsibility which somebody takes up when you say, please, can you please sign? I think that's what happens when you become a professional and you're part of a professional body. Even though you represent the same society, you cannot exactly replicate what happens in the society because you're part of a profession. And another wonderful thing which a profession like CA is that by the time a student spends those 3.5 or 4 years or even more, I think the student really becomes very spiritual, and because of the tough exams, right? And then by the time he becomes humble, and I think he becomes a human being, in my opinion, by my own experience. And there are certain professions which are quite easy. The student does not go through all these transformational steps. See, he's just the same. He's just as cool as he was. So I think professions like the Chartered Accountants, I'm not saying CA is the only course. One of the courses, of course you have the ICAA or even the CFA. These courses actually make people humble. That's one impact on we'll have the questions at the end of it. So we'll have the questions later. Right? We'll have the questions after the discussion. We'll have time for it. So that's the impact of a professional training versus generally being a member of the society, right? And I want to use this analogy, mass versus class. There is this mass and there is a class. You become a class being part of a profession, and definitely these financial institutions make you a class. Just imagine people who would have worked with him, people who would have been groomed by him, automatically they are influenced by his behavior. And the most important thing, like he talked about parenting, rather than people advising or telling, it's more important, as Bhagavan often says, it's important that you show the people how to behave. You don't tell. And I normally talk about sports. He talked about Dhoni. I take examples from sports whenever I talk to the younger generation. It reaches even more easily. Rahul Dravid, during his very first debut test match in England, that was his very first test match, and he was in his 90s. Just one shot of 100. Probably one boundary would have taken him to his 100. He nicked the ball. It was a very fine nick. It was a catch to the wicketkeeper. He did not stop. He did not look at the umpire. He did not wait for anybody to claim. He just started walking. I think that is the influence of a person being groomed by someone, maybe the parents, maybe the people around. And today, he is also doing the same thing to many other young people. He is not stopping with his own success. He is grooming a whole set of next generation cricketers who are not only intense cricketers, they're also highly ethical. I think that is the impact that a person can do, not by talking, not by advising, but actually showing. And maybe I would want to ask your opinion in terms of demonstrating the actual behavior. How was it then? How is it now? And anything else you would want to share?
On the example which you talked about, the walkers, I mean those who don't wait for the umpire and who walk when they know they have nicked. You find the interesting argument today saying that when in an occasion when I have not nicked and the umpire gives me out, now who comes to my rescue? Okay, therefore when I nick and the umpire doesn't pick it up, it's fair. Okay, it's fair that I don't walk. Now this is the argument. Now this is an internal argument. Now, if you look at it, maybe in a way they are right, because nobody comes to the rescue and the umpire gives them out without there being a reason. So you tend to argue it from logic. So ethical values oftentimes crumble when you start looking at that logic. I mean that fierce logic. It's something beyond logic. Many times what is good, what is ethical is not bound by this logic. And on logic you are convinced. Yes, I mean it's 50-50. I mean you may gain sometimes, you may lose sometimes. So what? The second point I want to say is that continuing on this theme of time investment, and the influence which was very rightly pointed out of the seniors. During my articleship, throwing my mind back, I recall that my principals had enough time, let me say, not only during the day, but let's say after 4 o'clock, after 5 o'clock, to kind of chat with us in the firm, those who are doing articleship. Now today this life is so crowded that the principals don't have the time to spend with their wards. So what kind of influence is being created? Because they just don't have the time. It's the same problem as the family, that they don't have the time. They're all the time running. And probably I know one student who came and said that in my 3 years with the firm, I saw my partner who signs my articles deed. I've seen him 5 times in 3 years. Now it's something like that. So the influence is again waning compared to what it was, in our times. There is also this, I don't know how much I can, comment on that. But I always got the impression that the professionals of that generation were willing to take independent positions more boldly. Again, this is this idea of what you are losing. I think today, if you take an independent position, what you lose is huge. In those days, probably what they would lose was less. If they lost a client, I think the audit fee was so small that it didn't make a difference. Okay. Now it could be that, you could put that like that. But then I think the point was that somewhere in their economic management, I'm again talking about the economic management, somewhere in their economic management, this affordability was there, that you can lose a client and the heavens will not fall. Okay. Either they could adjust themselves or that they managed their finances well enough that they didn't have a problem. The other related, therefore, I see, I mean, looking back, my own principle, I did my articles in a medium-sized firm. I didn't do it in a large firm. I did in a medium-sized firm. What I said about the partner spending time was very true in my firm. After 4 o'clock, he will talk about everything, lot of things which we as young people did not know, including, which of the income tax officers were upright and which of them were not. Okay, now he would share a lot of things with us, I mean, which we would perhaps never have had privy to. Now, one of the things that we knew, he used to have, let's say, a hearing fixed at 10:30. And he was one man who will go 15 minutes before the appointed time. Meticulous. 10:15 he will be there. So 10:30 will come, he will send the slip to the officer. And even in those days there were officers and officers. People who wouldn't, kind of call him. It's 10:45. Nobody has called, I mean, he hadn't been called by the officer. He will write a slip saying that you called me at 10:30, I was here at 10:15, and I waited until 10:45. You didn't call me. Please give me alternate time, and leave the slip and walk off. I've seen that happen because I've accompanied him to the income tax department. I do not know whether that kind of behavior today can be even thought of. Now, where is this change? Why is it that our forefathers were able to be more independent than what we are today? I again go back to that economic management. I think that's the only explanation. We are so heavily in debt. We are so heavily, shall we say, mortgage the future for today, that we are simply not willing to take the slightest of risks. Our risk-bearing ability is nothing. Simply nothing. Because we have stretched ourselves already. So our risk-bearing ability is very small. And our ambitions are very high. Maybe those people had very, very ordinary ambitions. And therefore they didn't matter. But today these competitive pressures, this living up with the Jonases, now it is catching up so much that, that we don't have the strength which our previous generation had to be independent.
Thank you, sir. In recent times, in my observation of the corporate world, there's more focus on personality development, and it's very shallow, and it's never deep enough to touch somebody's soul inside. Like Stephen Covey very beautifully talks about the difference between personality-centric development and principle-centric development. He beautifully talks about that. And Swami often talks about this, right? You cannot always oblige, but you can always speak obligingly. And from a psychology perspective, this one statement goes very deep and is very powerful. And today, emotional intelligence is one that's being talked about all over the globe. And fundamentally, it's the lack of that emotional maturity or the poor management of the emotions that leads to many unethical acts. Spur of the moment, instant gratification. Let's go back to what happened about a year back when 3 Australian players, they mishandled the ball. I think it's again back to this emotional intelligence, where one person, spur of the moment, he thought, let me do it. One person was a witness, the other person probably encouraged, and then they got caught. And years back, I had been, as part of Satya Sai Seva organization, I had been to the central jail here to do bhajans there and to meet the inmates and offer sweets and all that. It used to be a very painful experience because most of them were actually not hardcore criminals. They were all people who, at some point of time, spur of the moment, they did something that was criminal. I think the same thing applies to the corporate world, the same thing applies to every profession, where if the person is not trained to handle emotions, if emotional intelligence is not dealt with in the appropriate manner as part of professional development, there is always a possibility that people would fall prey at that bad moment, right? And Sir would know better than me in the financial world. There are only two emotions that ruin people: fear and greed. There are just two emotions, fear and greed. These are the two emotions which would bring a person down. Spur of the moment, wrong decisions, going the unethical path. So this is another area where the corporate world, the professional world, parents, managers, leaders, he talked about his principals who spent the time in influencing. I think there is an urgent requirement for building a principle-centric development amongst young professionals, and also concentrating more on building their emotional intelligence, the emotional maturity. And in the audit world, the quality of being assertive is something which is really helpful. The difference between saying yes and no, I think, makes or breaks a professional at the right time. So your comments on these aspects, the emotional intelligence quotient, the assertiveness, etc.
Yeah, they do play a great part, and people at least today are aware of the EQ part. I mean, organizations are focusing on that. I want to kind of share a different kind of thought. I couldn't put it in my presentation, but I want to share it now with you. 50 years back, someone by name Joe Seidman was commissioned by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants to go into the cause of employee fraud in organizations, which included also management fraud. Management fraud was a term that was not in vogue in those days, but if you read through his inquiry, it included cases where the management did acts which were not on the book. Now he went through that beautiful summing up of what causes all these vacillations of mind. And he said that all these infractions are the result of the unholy trinity of babes, booze and bookies, or rum races and redheads, if you like. In other words, he said that those were the causes. Those are the habits, those were the kind of things that you are either a type given to boozing, or you are the type who is given to races, or you are the type who get attracted by women. Now all that kind of things. But if you look at the philosophy behind it, in those days, to indulge in unethical practice, you need to have a sinful background. Now today, the majority of the people who are doing what is called the unethical practice, who are indulging in the unethical practice, are not guilty of any of these three sins. It is people, very respectable people, who are getting into this ethical dilemma. So you don't have to be a sinner to break the ethics today. You can be a very normal person. You can be a person with very good value systems, and you are still being forced by this hostile environment to kind of break the rules, which is, to my mind, I think it has a story of its own. 50 years back, that was the finding, that you needed to have an obnoxious habit in order to be forced to do something that is unethical. Today it is normal persons, people with good value systems, who are doing unethical acts because this environment is so hostile to them. Like I mentioned, someone can't keep the standard of living, and therefore they're indulging or acquiescing in a behavior that he or she wouldn't have done. I think this is an issue which we must ponder over, kind of think what has happened in the 50 years, that it has so fundamentally changed, that it's not sinful behavior, it is something which is more fundamental. The second point which also keeps crossing my mind is that, yes, societal values, are they having an impact on the ethical behavior of professions? I think yes, because I think it has a profound effect. You have the corrupt politicians, you have the corrupt business leaders, and the professional is brought up first mistaking them to be heroes, and later he finds that those heroes are guilty of several unethical behavior, and therefore he conditions his mind to thinking that yes, I think it's right. Now if so and so can do it, so can I. Okay. Now this is a kind of logic. Now this logic is affecting the professional in two ways. One, I said business leaders not setting an example. Political leaders not setting an example. Someone who read Discovery of India was, when I first time read Discovery of India, I was differently influenced hugely by that book. And Nehru was a kind of personality who made you believe in the bigger values in life. He made you believe in that. Someone said, when a man is great, he makes you believe in greatness. So it's one of those characters. Now today it is not like that. There is so much of infraction in all these areas that the young professional coming up, looking at those business, because you have to look at business leaders, you are in business, you are entering the business as a professional. So you're looking at the business leaders, you are looking at the political leaders, and there is no example. And therefore it becomes very difficult to build those ethical values into them. What is worse, I think, is that the professional entering the accounting profession looks around. How are the lawyers? What kind of my profession is bad? I see a lot of sharp practices here. But how is the legal profession doing? How is the medical profession doing? And now he looks at it and he doesn't really get evidence that will strengthen his value systems. So he thinks, oh, I see, this is the world. Now it is not only my profession which has these, shall we say, unhealthy elements, but every profession has got. And he is not mature enough to see whether that is the majority or that is the minority. Because in many cases, it becomes sensational to report cases of unethical behavior. So the good news never gets reported. Good news is no news. It's only bad news which is news. And therefore that gets reported. So with all that, I think the young professional hasn't got that opportunity to kind of ground himself in the value systems to be able to face ethical conflicts later in his life.
What Swami has advocated, sealing on desires. I think that's something wonderful, which is even more pertinent for today's generation. It's not only that you can lead an ethical life, it's also something that in the long term you can have a peaceful life. End of the day, a truly successful professional is one who can sleep well when he goes back to bed. And sealing on desires will definitely help. And I think it has been some wonderful experiences and thoughts shared by you, sir. So now we are open to some questions.
One or two questions. I would not like to delay much, but what I really think after your story, after all these deliberations, sir spoke very well about the current themes, and we also spoke well about Swami's ethics, which is very. Swami stresses on Balvikas. That's the reason he stresses on Balvikas. He is not a mere child teaching.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, sir. Okay, any questions? Fine. So once again, thank you very much, sir. It's a privilege to share the stage with you. And like I said, all of us are blessed to listened from people like you who have demonstrated all these things. 1,000 PowerPoint presentations will not equal a real person who has lived such a life. So please join me in applauding it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now we'll have Mahamangala Harti.
ॐ जय जगदीश हरे स्वामी सत्य साई हरे भक्तजना संरक्षक भक्तजना संरक्षक पति महेश्वरा ॐ जय जगदीश हरे शशिवदना श्रीकरा सर्वा प्राणपदे स्वामी सर्वा प्राणपदे आश्रित कल्पलतिका आश्रित कल्पलतिका आबद्बान्धवा ॐ जय जगदीश हरे माता पिता गुरुदैवमु मरियन्तयु नीवे स्वामी मरियन्तयु नीवे नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथ नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथ नागेन्द्राशयना ॐ जय जगदीश हरे ओंकार रूप वो जय शिवो साई महादेवा सत्य साई महादेवा मंगल हारति अंदुकु मंगल हारति अंदुकु मंदर गिरिधारी ओम जय जगदीश हरे नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा ओम शांति 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 समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः जय बोलो भगवान श्री सत्य साई बाबा जी की।
Advocacy loved by one and all in India and abroad. Even before the phrase corporate social responsibility gained significance, it was textured into the group's value systems. And today, this phrase has been redefined by Mr. Murali as citizen social responsibility. Chennai 365, an effort by SKS in association with social, sports and cultural bodies to do good to a vibrant Chennai. To Sri Krishna Sweets, it's no mere rule. It's not just an act. It's every citizen's social responsibility. After all, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And in the process, create a world where life's best bonds are built with love and care. And in time, they will become our strongest bond.